Hi everybody, welcome. I'm Sherry Daly. I'm the person that schedules programs. So one of the things that we like to ask is that at the end of this one, there are some evaluation forms on the back table. If you can complete one, we'd really appreciate it. It helps us know how we're doing, and you know, if you want more of Rick or less of Rick, whatever. This is part of our summer reading program for adults series. The theme of the summer reading program for children, teens, and adults this year, the underlying theme is science. So I was hoping to find some programs for my local history series on Monday nights once a month that would also be about science. And Rick came through for me with Edmund Angell.
Hi.
Whoops, excuse me.
Thank you. Leave that right there. Stay. Okay. I know it's always appropriate to start with a piece of humor. Tonight I'll be brief. For those who know me, that's my humor. All right. This last year, a young man from Pinkerton and I worked on a project at this old academy building in honor of Edmund Angell. So many of these photographs are from ones that Andy Stock and I developed over there. Andy was working on his Eagle Scout project, and Edmund Angell was his Eagle Scout project. And many of these photographs, and I should say, they came from glass negatives. And we have probably well over 150 glass negatives that were done by Edmund Angell, and they were all done between the 1870s and about 1910, someplace around there. So it really does show what Derry was like during those years. We bought the last batch of these last year, and we were helped by Pinkerton Academy in getting that, because they're not cheap. Now, over on the table there, I have the plaque. I'm going to wander over there and disturb Mr. Riley, our cameraman. This is the plaque that I'm bringing with me to Northern Ireland next week. For those who haven't seen it in the paper, the government of Belfast, of Northern Ireland, is putting up a plaque in Agadooey in honor of James McGregor, who was the founder of our town, Derry and Londonderry. So it's very much of a high honor for a foreign government to honor our founder. So they invited me to be over there to do the unveiling, and so I'm bringing this. This here is James McGregor's house. It was torn down in 1863, but they still realized that it was a precious relic of our town, so a lot of the pieces of wood were saved. So this little cross was made from a piece of Reverend James McGregor's house. And so this will be going back to James McGregor's church in that little town of Agadooey. James McGregor is called the Moses of the Scotch-Irish in America. He's the one who started that pilgrimage. And as a result, thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands left Scotland and Northern Ireland to follow James McGregor, of which now 17 presidents can trace in their heritage that they are Scotch-Irish. So every year for the last 4, 5, 6 years, we've had a film crew here in Derry filming TV specials, and it's not because we're important or famous other than James McGregor. So it's quite an honor for Derry. Now, we had a lecturer yesterday, and I told him how easy it is to be an historian here in Derry. There's more history for every square inch in Derry than any town that I know of. And every field, there is somebody from Derry who made it to the top. In music, Buddy Stewart. Buddy Stewart recorded the first bebop record ever recorded. He was with Gene Krupa. Walter Adams discovered the first white dwarf star. One of the famous astronomers, friend of Einstein, friend of Steinmetz. Ruth Pillsbury, who was an excellent artist and designed so many of our covers for our town reports. Colonel William Pillsbury, one a great industrialist. All right, I think you can all name one astronaut who came from this town. How about a great military general? John Stark. A signer of the Declaration of Independence, Matthew Thornton, lived here when he signed it. We had 3 governors come from Derry. We had Mary Lyon, who was the first, the mother of female education in America. We had Pam Smart. Well, I didn't say they all had to be good. They just had to become famous from Derry.
Well, she was infamous, rather.
She was infamous.
Yes.
Add that word, I am. and it can go on and on and on. And right up there in that pantheon is James McGregor. Now, if we go to a picture of James McGregor, no, wrong lecture notes, all right, to Edmund Angell. Now, he was born in Rhode Island. We don't hold that against him. And his family in Rhode Island went back about 8 generations, right back to the 17th century, a very old family. He went to the district schools in that town, and then went to Bates, where he graduated in 1873 with a BA, and then to Divinity College, where he got his training in that. So he was always on the cusp, whether he was going to be a minister or an educator. And he kind of worked it out so he was both. He went through a bunch of schools as headmaster, as principal. Finally, he came here to Pinkerton Academy, and he was hired in 1876, that's the American centennial year, to become the headmaster at Pinkerton Academy. And he would stay there for the next 10 years. And the changes he made at Pinkerton were radical. He changed the curriculum from being quite so stodgy to being much more modern. And for the rest of his life, he would be a crusader for reforms in education. And while he was at Pinkerton, he stayed after he was principal. He kept on teaching at Pinkerton. One of these $1-a-year men. And he would have a few classes. And he stayed at Pinkerton until right before World War I. And while he was there for 6 of those years, he taught with Robert Frost. And he's very instrumental in having Robert Frost teach at Pinkerton. So another thing to his credit. Now, in 1882, the state of New Hampshire decided that it needed to be modern and have a state chemist. Dr. Angell, Professor Angell. No real training in this stuff. He learned it, and he became our first state chemist. And he would remain the chemist from 1882 all the way up to 1900. If some of you remember the old TV show Quincy, that was his job. He would go to every murder in the state and do the analysis. Every school in the state could expect a visit from Professor Angell, and he would test your water. Every one of these grand hotels up in the White Mountains, Dr. Angell would visit to test the water, to make sure the sanitation was proper, to make sure that nobody died of all these diseases. And his safe was just filled with murder weapons. I remember seeing it as a boy. There was guns and knives and everything else just tossed into his safe from former murder trials. And Then he decided, I'm sorry, did we go to the, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to give you a hint. Yes. All right. I'm not used to working with this much technology. And this is probably 1876. A picture of Dr. Angell, Mr. Angell, in his classroom at Pinkerton, and we can go to Pinkerton and be in that exact same room. This is in the Academy building, the old white building with the cupola on top and the bell. And if you go in the door on the left-hand side, that's this room. And you can see by this photograph that when they had a blackboard in those days, it was a blackboard. Can you see it up here? All that is a board painted black, and they would use chalk on it. Slate board would come much later. And of course, those ones had the advantages. You didn't scrape your wasn't that terrible? A terrible sound? Now, while he was the state chemist, he also decided to do his own chemistry. So in 1899, he built his own chemical laboratory right there on Thornton Street in Derry Village, or the lower village. And so this was, Telsberries, have you ever seen this picture before?
No, I haven't.
We have I have a lot of people from the family here in the audience, and I think they're going to be the first time they've ever seen these photographs, these glass negatives. And so this was his laboratory, and here he manufactured all kinds of stuff. He made hand cream. Thousands of bottles of hand cream and brass polish, all kinds of things. His big invention was a device to light your houses with acetylene. I actually have one of those over to Pinkerton Academy right now. A man in Fremont found one in his garage. Didn't know what it was. Saw the name Derry on it, so he called me up, and I told him it was a rocket and it was going to explode, so he better give it to me. And I got it. So there you see what it's like. This was actually a way to generate the acetylene. And he did all these wonderful little booklets describing it. Here's the opening. It says, "Light is the most interesting subject in the night of ignorance, or the night of day." He describes himself as an analytical and consulting chemist, a chemical engineer in court cases, an expert in scientific and mechanical principles. And here's his motto for this: difficulties overcome, absolute safety assured, insurance interests protected. The greatest luxury and blessing is artificial light enjoyed, everybody satisfied. And then in large print, not what might be, but what is. So it was his idea that people way out in the country could have their houses lit. Not having kerosene, you could have a little building out behind your house that would generate this and be piped into your house, and you could have lights. Now, doesn't that kind of look like a modern lamp there? And here it is. Now that lamp, he would sell that for $1.50. And then, you know, but you'd have to have the stuff that would connect to it and so forth. And he had stoves. This is a fascinating little device here, which falls on the floor. This is a device where you can put your sad irons. You know, those non-electric irons that you iron clothes and they weigh about 5 pounds?
The door stops.
Yeah, door stops today.
Yeah.
You'd have acetylene inside here and then rest your iron on that. This is all pre-electric. And you'd have chandeliers, everything, all from acetylene.
How do they make it?
It was a chemical process. And being a chemist, he would know. Of course.
So would it be delivered like that in a tank?
And
or would you be given the chemicals?
you'd be given the chemicals and...
And you do it yourself?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
A bit like the wartime World War II, the acetylene lamps we used to have, drop that in water and that used to...
Right, yeah. Like lime or something like that, sure. In Chester, behind the town hall, the old town hall, the Stevens Hall, there is still the gas house. Because Chester's town hall was lit with Dr. Angell's acetylene lights. And the building is still there. It was a pretty good sized building because it had to be for a pretty big house. So they were sold, I think, in 4 continents. People were buying them in South America and Mexico and Europe and Asia. In Derry, a whole bunch of the houses and buildings on Broadway were by acetylene. And then one blew up. If you know where Cumberland Farms is, there was the Oddfellows Hall there, and that was lit by acetylene, and it blew up. That didn't help his market very much. There was a definite danger from acetylene, if not taken care of perfectly. And by the time this was happening, another thing was happening. Electricity was coming through town. And even out into the rural areas, they started to have electricity. And so acetylene was just a thing of the past. And so, good idea, reasonably safe. He would say it's safer than electricity, because more people would be electrocuted than would be killed by acetylene. So, but I'm afraid it was just one of these things that didn't work. Now, he held 9 different patents. And I have some of the patent models over there. One of them was a device to remove snow and ice from sidewalks. My favorite was the odorless chemical privy. Moving around, which is this thing right here. Before you could get a patent in those days, you had to make a model. And so this was the model. He probably made 2. That would be sent into Washington, D.C. to get your patent for this. The chemical toilet. And some people say that he is the father of the chemical toilet. I'm not sure that's something that you want engraved on your gravestone. But here is his pamphlet for the chemical toilet. And basically what it is that box, and with a seat in it, and below it is a 10-gallon copper container. Now, when not in use, that little thing would close off. When in use, you had to remember to pull the trap door open. And on top of this toilet was a rubber bulb in which would spray carbonic acid to disinfect and reduce odors. He advised the people to spray it immediately after using it. And according to him, you could use this, keep this toilet in your living room. And there would be no smell. and you would have to only have to empty it twice a month. I'm just saying what he said.
Didn't count the number of people in the house, obviously.
All right, it all depends, I suppose.
Yes.
And he advises you the fact that no longer would old people have to get sick by having to leave the house in the middle of winter and go outside to use the privy. You could have this right in your house. And all kinds of doctors in this pamphlet said how wonderful it was, that it was the best invention ever made. Dr. Newell of Derry, some of you may remember Harriet Newell, gave it his unqualified recommendation as the best of the kind I've ever seen. Dr. David Clark said every house should have one. Dr. Emerson of Chester gave his support, and Elizabeth Eaton of Derry wrote that her old privy gave off such an odor that during the warm month it was sickening. But the new Angell toilet is absolutely free from any odor. All right, great invention. What killed it off?
Plumbing.
Pardon?
Plumbing.
Plumbing killed it off. Electricity came in, modern plumbing, and so when he invented it, it was a great invention. The time was right. He was right. This could really help. And you know, that with privies, it does spread diseases if it's too close to your water supply. This would protect against that. But the timing was exactly wrong. The same with the acetylene. It's sometimes you have a great idea, but you know, it's the time. And he also invented a puncture-proof automobile tire. Now, this is back in the before the Model Ts. When you had a solid rubber tire, it was pretty hard to drive on. And the pneumatic tires they had in those days, they get punctured very easily. So he came up with his own invention. It was a wooden tire. And around the outside, he would have circles about 6 inches across of solid rubber. So it was studded with rubber on a wooden base. And great invention. I don't know whatever happened to it. He also invented a bicycle with a motorcycle engine in it. And he was also a manufacturer of tonic, soda, pop, any of the euphemisms you give to that stuff. All right, he was the chief partner in something called the Lafayette Mineral Springs. And on Thornton Street, now this was actually on the spot where his laboratory would be built later. And this is where they manufactured ginger ale, root beer, orange soda.
Sarsaparilla.
Moxie.
I don't know if they ever married sarsaparilla.
Oh.
What about Moxie?
No, but sometimes, I got a bottle over here. This is from the Lafayette Mineral Springs. This is what the soda would be sold in. And on here would be a paper label. It might be bitter orange, or it might be ginger ale, or so forth. And sometimes you find Lafayette mineral paper on a Moxie bottle. Not because they were manufacturing Moxie,
He was recycling.
but they were recycling. Which is Yankee. And I think you can see over here, these are all used bottles that would be eventually brought in. And this is somebody I remember. That's Ralph Angell. A good friend to me when I was a little boy, and as a teenager, he was a fun person. You never know, he would be walking across Derry Village wearing a top hat some days. A story I've told many times. When I was 5 years old, walking down Broadway with my father at night, and Ralph was there, and he came over to talk to my father, and he looked at me, talked to me who he was, and then he said, "Hold it," and he just ran away to a near fruit store, Peroni's, and came out and gave me a pomegranate. He thought that every 5-year-old should have a pomegranate once in their life. And he was a printer by trade, and over to Benjamin Chase, right above his printing press, was a photograph of his father, Edmund Angell, and underneath he had written in pencil, "My dad." So, all right, I'm going to start Mr. Riley again by moving over here. All right, he was a Republican, and he served in both the House and the Senate from New Hampshire, from the State House. In Derry, he was elected selectman, but I think the job he enjoyed most was a term called the prosecutor of liquor agent. During Prohibition, he was the one who wanted to make sure that you weren't imbibing. If there's anything that he hated, it was liquor. He ran a dry house. And I'm sure that has carried down to all the Pillsburys ever since.
Yeah.
And he was also the milk inspector for the town. He would go to every farm that had cows and test their milk, including Hood. And he didn't find that Hood had the cleanest cows. He found that Ross's had a cleaner cow than Hood. And he had put in the newspaper which farms sold the cleanest, purest milk. And he was a member of the first Board of Health of Derry. He belonged to a lot of different organizations. Do we have an organization picture? Yes, we do. Here he is as a Mason. He also belonged to the Odd Fellows and Knights of Pythias, and I think the Red Man too. If you look over here, that's Edmund right there. Now, that would be Ralph right next to his son. And next to him is Arthur Reynolds. Arthur Reynolds was the man who hated Robert Frost the most. They were both teachers at Pinkerton, and they did not get along. Smug-looking little guy.
Was he related to Ned Reynolds?
I'm sorry?
Was he related to, or was Ned Reynolds
No,
related?
no relation.
No relation.
No, he came from the state of Maine, and he became our second superintendent of schools. Left, and then came back to teach in Pinkerton for a while, and then died out in Iowa. I'm sure unloved and Actually, I don't know. Robert Frost wrote many things about him that were very unkind, and I don't know whether Arthur Reynolds deserved him or not. But I'm a biographer of Robert Frost, so I tend to believe it. He had a wife, Lizzie, 2 children, Everett, who was born in 1880, and Ralph, who was born in 1884. When Everett was 9 years old, he was the perfect child. He was helpful to his father. He was bright, blue eyes, blonde hair. Everybody's idea of what a good 9-year-old should be. Every day, he'd get up before the rest of the family and light the fire in the kitchen, get everything going, so Mom could have everything ready to make breakfast a little bit later. He'd do his chores. He was good to his brother Ralph. And then he got sick. He came down one morning in March 16th, 1890. He came down and lit the fire and then complained that he just didn't feel well. He didn't eat anything. He not only had a very good appetite, but he then started to vomit. Now, everybody just assumed that he was just suffering from a springtime bug. This was March. All kids get that. Sometime in the spring, you give them some sulfur and molasses and everything is back to normal. Everett couldn't sleep that night. He just tossed and turned and kept his parents up. The next day, his mother had to help him get dressed. The word was sent to the doctor, Dr. Clark, who lived right, the Angells lived in the village, and Dr. Clark was only about 5 houses down. And Dr. Clark came over and looked at him and said, well, maybe it's tonsillitis. It's nothing serious, we'll just kind of wait, and he'll be back to being the free spirit he has always been. The boy did not improve. He started to have severe pains. He became delirious. Dr. Clark kept on coming back to see the boy, and he just wasn't getting any better. Didn't know. Professor Angell, the father, was a man of science, a chemist, a professor. He couldn't figure out what was wrong. He was just powerless to help this boy. You could just see that his life was just slipping away. Somehow, the doctor misdiagnosed it. And the boy was just laying in bed, family surrounding him. And the boy suddenly became alert and looked up towards the window and pointed, saying he could see angels coming to take him home. And then he died. And his father was so grief-stricken. This is his grave at Forest Hills. And as Dr. Clark was helping the undertaker prepare the body for burial, he suddenly looked at young Everett's 9-year-old boy's wrist and his neck, and he came to the conclusion that the boy had scarlet fever, something that could have been cured so easy, but Dr. Clark just missed it. And because scarlet fever at that time was such it could spread, they couldn't even have a funeral for the boy. They just brought him to Forest Hills and just the family gathered around. And I think you probably all know some people, like the Velveteen Rabbit. That's what that child was suffering from. In Louisa May Alcott's Little Woman, it was Laura who died went blind from that. In A Little House on the Prairie, the oldest girl had scarlet fever and went blind. So it was a bad disease, but it could have been cured. Dr. Clark knew how to, but he just didn't see. And so, that's designed to look like a slide, a playground in heaven. So this is at Forest Hills over there in East Derry until the day dawns and the darkness disappeared. And it says, in God's workshop. And this, in the family farm, there was a stone that had been broken in half that the boys, Ralph and Everett, used to play on. And so Dr. Angell brought the stone over and made it his gravestone. And on the stone, he put Everett's last words, "See them up yonder." 1880, 1890. And below that, of course, is Ralph's grave. Now, Edmund Angell's, there we go. Too many angels here. His motto in life was, the highest duty of mankind next to the adoration of God is to help one another. He spent the rest of his life trying to find ways to prevent diseases. Every school would be checked by him. Every water supply. It was a mission for him not to let this happen again. In religion, he believed in the golden rule, creeds for nobody and charity for all. He died in 1937 and was buried in the family lot. On the other half of the stone was used for his grave marker. Now on the right there is his wife Lizzie's grave. And Ralph told me that Lizzie was one of these people who was always nervous. She was always sure that she wouldn't get things right. She was positive she was going to make a mistake. I think you all know people like that. And her last words are, "I don't know how to die." And that's what's on her stone. And he lists about him being in Pinkerton. After he left Pinkerton, incidentally, he was headmaster for several years at Chester Academy. Now, he was an extremely gifted photographer. He would develop his own photographs using glass negatives, one of those old cameras with the hoods on it and so forth. And he would travel all over the town with Ralph, taking these pictures. For a while, he had a photography studio on Broadway. He wrote that photography is a kind of immortality. By it, the absent or departed live in memories most vividly. Now, in the museum, we have over 150 of his glass negatives, and they are really one of the real treasures we have, because they are so clear. With a glass negative, you can go right into the photograph, whereas a modern photograph, there's only a limit how far before things start becoming blurry. With a glass negative, you can get the depth. You can almost see what's going on around the corner. And Dr. Angell was a great photographer. He knew how to get human expressions out of people who don't want to give you an expression. And one of the things he did was to make stereoptograph photographs. So there'd be two pictures. The camera had two lenses. It would take the picture at the same time, but the picture would be off a little bit from each one. And so you would get the depth the same way you do with your eyes. And then you would make that on paper and then put it into one of these stereoptograph viewers, and it would give you a 3D effect. So here are two girls sitting in Derry Village, in front of, well, you can see in the background the Association Hall, that antique shop there. And very prim and proper young ladies. Don't know who they are, but it's great photographs. You can go on. Does anyone recognize this man? You all know him. That's H.P. Hood.
Was that him?
That's probably the last picture ever taken of H.P. Hood. This is right before he died in 1900. Picture taken by Dr. Angell. And you can see the man is not destined to live much longer. And I didn't include that picture of his wife, did I?
No, I don't.
No. I got a picture of his wife that same day, and she looks like she died the week before. But she would live for the next 25 years.
How much difference in age between the two?
Yeah.
Oops.
He took this picture when a bunch of girls from Radcliffe came over, and these two are Derry girls, and these other girls are visiting them. Some of you old-timers, that limits it down to a few, I suppose, would remember one of them, Sylvia Clark. Remember Sylvia? And Sylvia was the best friend of Robert Frost when he was teaching at Pinkerton. And I have a letter from Sylvia, or actually from Robert Frost to Sylvia. Sylvia had just written Robert Frost. This is back in the 1950s. And Robert Frost wrote to Sylvia saying, "We have now been friends for over 50 years. Don't just think it's time that I called you by your first name." That's how people were in those days. You know, Harriet Newell, she went with her husband Charles, and Robert Frost and his wife went camping together for a whole summer. But she never called him Rob. It was always Mr. Frost and Mrs. Newell. Just that formality we had. I bet a lot of you had some of your older relatives, you know, grandmothers on each side, and the two grandmothers would call each other Mrs. and Mrs. rather than using their first names. Isn't that a great name? Can you imagine how much work that would be?
I was brought up to call all my elders Mr. and Mrs.
Yeah.
No matter whether they were relatives or not.
Oh, sure. It was very hard for me to start calling him Warren until he told me to. And recognize these are all Dr. Angell's photographs.
That's Pinkerton.
That's Pinkerton. That's the chapel, as it would have appeared in the 1890s or 1900s, somewhere around that period. You can see the stage up there. And next, please. Isn't that darling? Two little girls from school are those. And when I got this negative, it was damaged. Because, you know, they use egg whites to make the emulsion that they put on these pieces of glass, and that would hold the chemicals so you would get the image. Well, part of the emulsion had peeled off. And so this poor little girl had only half a face, and this hat was only half there. It was just a black spot there. So I had my restorer fix it. He flipped the girl's face over. Yeah. So it looks pretty good. He did a good job.
He did. Excellent.
Yeah. And I think for most people, unless I pointed it out to you, you wouldn't know.
No,
Aren't those socks wonderful?
I love the Derry boots.
Yeah. A little girl with a China head doll. That's great. All right. Inside Pinkerton, the art class. We have probably 8 or 9 interior shots of Pinkerton Academy, as it was, well, more than 100 years ago now. And so, you know, they're copying models and so forth. And you can go right into Pinkerton in the big brick building, and you can go into that exact same classroom and, you know, and figure out exactly where you are. Next, please. All right. This is Seneca Patty's sparkle oil. He would go to your house and deliver kerosene. And obviously he thought it would sell more if he made his kerosene wagon into the shape of a locomotive. So that's his, he called it daylight oil there. Another times he calls it sparkle oil. It was just kerosene. Yeah.
Is there any way you could give us what year that was taken?
We can only approximate because Seneca Patty was a lot of years. We can say it's most likely circa 1890.
Okay.
And that's definitely going to be 1890 to 1900, right in that period.
Before electricity arrived.
Oh, yeah. And because every house needed kerosene.
Right.
As a boy, we had a big barrel of kerosene downstairs, you know, for the lamps.
Safer than accessory.
And for the stove.
Yeah,
My parents cooked on kerosene.
right. Oh, Broadway.
Now, do you all recognize where Dr. Angell took this picture? He wouldn't want to do it today standing in the middle of the road like that. And you can see the trolley. Now, we can date this because that trolley went in about 1905, 1906. So that's the Derry and Manchester trolley. Originally, I think it was called the Derry and Hooksett. No, Derry and Goffs Falls trolley.
The rails were still in the road, in Broadway, when I was in grammar school, west side.
You can still see the tracks.
Yep.
Yep. Right down the middle of Broadway. Now, this building, of course, is still standing today. If you go this road right here, that would go down to Benson's Hardware. So you know about where you are now?
Yeah.
This building's gone. This used to be Aubuchon's.
Right.
And this was the trolley station right here. I think there's a nail parlor there now or something like that. And we had two trolley lines. The Chester and Derry was on the other side of the depot. So they were separated by about 150 feet. So you couldn't just go from Chester to Manchester. You had to go from Chester to Derry, get off, walk across, wait for half an hour because the schedules did not go together. And then, why didn't the schedules go together? Why didn't they connect the two trolleys?
Because one's going to be late, and they'll miss the other one.
Competition.
Competition, different families.
A different company owns them.
The Pillsburys had no desire to help the Shepherds, and the Shepherds had no desire to help the Pillsburys.
So they were privately owned.
Yeah, and that's the story of it. All right.
You didn't know that?
Can you spot this house? It looks better in the picture now than then than now.
It's not the
It's
Thornton
changed
house.
greatly. Pardon?
The Thornton house.
No. You've gone by it 150 times. Well, 150 times a month. Chin's Restaurant. The Chinese restaurant across from the country
Traditional
club.
Homestead.
What?
The Hood Homestead.
That's the Hood Homestead.
Right.
This is where H.P. pretty much lived from 1850 to his death in 1900. And right next to this would be a 100-foot barn with always 100 cows inside and a lot more heifers and calves. And some of us remember when this was still a house and the barn was still there, and twice a day all the cars on Broadway would have to come to a stop and they'd be backed up for a quarter of a mile while the Hoods took their cows from one side of Broadway to where the golf course is today.
Right.
And in the afternoon, same thing. You were trying to get home from work, and these cows were preventing you from.
And there were Guernseys.
They were Guernseys. And they were a prize herd, but as the family pretty much gave this to the town.
It did.
The Hoods have been extremely generous in so many ways. If you go to Dartmouth College, you have the Hood Museum. If you go to the University of New Hampshire, you have the Hood Building. Our hospital was given by the Hood family. There's still millions of dollars in trust kept in Derry that were given by the Hood family. And, all right, but if you look, see these kids? With the glass negative, you can do this. That is Gilbert Hood. I know my grandkid goes to Gilbert Hood School, and that's the person who was named after. A little bit younger.
What year was that taken?
1890s still,
Still,
and his two sisters.
another two.
Now, this was taking over on Eagles Hill. And I know there's a tendency for you newcomers to call it Ella's Hill. It's where exit 4 is. And so, Dr. Angell and Ralph went up there and took this photograph showing what Derry was like. I know the date of this one, 1895. And if you really want to put a lot of work into it, you can look in that photograph, as I have for dozens and dozens of hours, and start to figure out what each of these buildings are. And you can spot the 3 or 4 or 5 churches, you can spot the academy, you can spot the water towers, you can spot so many things that aren't there. You can spot all kinds of shoe factories and causeways. And because it's glass, again, you can really go into it and find out what was there. Now, Dr. Angell did this not just for Ella's Hill, Eagles. He did it also this is Derry Village, looking down from East Derry Hill. And so you can see Pinkerton Academy, Central Congregational Church, the Methodist Church in Derry Village that was torn down in 1927. You know, none of us can go back in time, but through photographs, you can get it pretty close. I can actually feel like I know what Derry Village was like because of Dr. Angell's photographs.
Fantastic.
And the 3 villages. And this is East Derry, looking across Beaver Lake. And you can see the Upper Village Hall and the First Parish Church and a lot of other buildings. And now, of course, that's all housing developments and so forth. So it's just marvelous, these things. These are treasures. Now here we have, we don't really need that. This, I know, it's hard. This is on Crescent Street. This is Harriet Newell's house on Crescent Street. All right, and you get this photograph, all right, and, all right, you can actually see Harriet and her mother sitting on the front and walking along. You can recognize it, and that's Ben Chase, of the Benjamin Chase condominiums now. And so this has just captured it. Here, this building right here, I'd seen it in other photographs, but I didn't know what it was until I got Dr. Angell's and blew it up. And then it became obvious what that building was.
The settling house. No?
A pigeon coop. The man was racing pigeons.
Oh.
And something I didn't know. And thanks to Dr. Angell, I do. And this is even a closer picture, which you can see. Which you can see Ben Chase, Harriet, and her mother. So, you know, probably if the window was open, I could have looked in and seen the maid's quarters too.
It's been taken the end of April. Not a leaf in sight.
Yeah, I have a whole series of these, and one of them, they're all covered by leaves, and you can't see anything.
Right.
All right. By the way, let me see if I can. This is Broadway, and these are shoe factories over there. Over here we have the cemetery. So, all right. He also could do characters. you could pay money and bring in your baby and have angel photographs made. And this is of a, I have no idea how old this lady is. I think the phrase old is probably an understatement. She's probably had a very hard life. I would say she was a farm wife. Been out in the sun a lot of times, that wrinkles. Look at the size of those hands. Those are hands that is used to hard work. In her hand, there's still that femininity. You know, Dr. Angell wanted to make sure you realize this was a woman, still a woman, even at this age, with all the cares she has had in her life. So he put a rose in her hand. The one strange thing, though, if you look at her, she has a beard.
I was going to say that.
I don't know when women started plucking their beard hairs out. But it's a beautiful study of a woman. And you can imagine what kind of life she must have gone through. You know, this was probably, you know, before 1900. You know, she was probably born in a time before, you know, before the War of 1812. You know, she would have known soldiers, old men who fought in the Revolutionary War. She would have been a woman at the time of the Civil War. Think of the pageant of history that face has seen. And I think Dr. Angell captured it quite well.
Did you notice she hasn't got a wedding ring?
She has no wedding ring. Yeah.
I noticed that too.
Yeah.
She's a hard-working
Yeah.
maid.
Yeah. Go ahead. You don't recognize this house.
Looks familiar.
That's Pinkerton Tavern. It was torn down 2 years ago now.
Oh, number 5.
Number 5.
Yes? When they changed the numbers in 81, it used to be 19.
What a memory. I'm impressed. But this was where James Pinkerton had the first store in Derry, in that one room. You know, this is where the Pinkertons lived for almost 100 years. And then it became a store, a farm, selling milk.
Ashir milk.
Pardon?
Ashir milk.
Ashir milk. Now for a while it was actually owned by the Ross Dairy.
Oh, yeah.
And then the town had it torn down 2 years ago.
It was a restaurant too at one time.
It was a restaurant, yeah.
Yeah.
Now for one, they sold unfinished furniture for a while in it. And I think we've lost a lot by having that being torn down. Next, please. All right, this is another picture, a different one, of Derry Village. And if you look here, that's Pinkerton. This is the Central Congregational Church. It doesn't look like that today because they've added a porch with some pillars in front. But this is how it used to look. This would be how it would look when Robert Frost was here. This is the Methodist Church on Nesmith Street. It was founded about 1835. It became a big church. And then they started a mission church on Broadway, St. Luke's. But with all the shoe factories, all the shoe workers, they went to that church on Broadway, and this church, the original mother church, saw its population, its congregation going down and down, and finally by about 1919 it was sold to a fraternal organization called the Knights of Malta. And they kept it until they dissolved. In about 1927 it was torn down. And you can go to that spot, and there's a private house built on that spot, built with a lot of the lumber that came from that Methodist church. So that's where Methodism started here in Derry. Isn't that a great picture? This is what's known as the money shot. This is the one which you can sell to magazines if they want to show what life was like. Now, we know the exact date because we get a calendar up there. You know, we know, I think it was 1904, I can't quite read it from here.
1902.
1902. We know exactly. I can probably figure out who those 4 men are. I know it's in the Derry News office. And a TV screen is not the best medium for seeing this, okay? But if you had my computer and we just zoomed right in, we could read that sign on the wall. I can actually read what the cards are in those people's hands. The sign on the wall above the men say that gentlemen, I'm paraphrasing it, gentlemen do not expectorate on the floor.
Here's the spittoon.
Right. So this is that Saturday night poker match that I'm sure every town had one and probably still does.
I don't think they're playing poker, are they? How many cards they got in their hand?
I don't know.
3, 4,
I'd hate to think it was
5, 6,
gin
7.
rummy. Great picture. Next, please.
They've got at least 7 cards in
All
there.
right, here's the Methodist Church
Oh, yes.
that was torn down in 1927 on Esmond Street. You can see the Pinkerton Tower in the background, so you can get a good idea. And Ralph Stearns told me that it was built with a wide space in between the sides, probably for insulation. And so Ralph would sneak in and when it was deserted and just rummage through the whole place, and the janitor would always try to find him, but Ralph would just hide inside the walls, and the janitor could never find him. Next, please. All right, I shouldn't show those pictures before, huh? Yeah. So here we can see, but this one here does not have Harriet or Ben Chase in it, and does have the pigeon coop. And we can see that Dr. Angell was standing on somebody's roof in order to get this photograph. Because, okay, you can see a good shot of the Central Congregational Church there, without the pillars. And what is in that area now, in the foreground, is houses. Next, please. This is the Academy building,
The first one.
right, in its original location. Its original location was where the big brick Pinkerton building is now.
Oh, they shifted it down towards the road?
Yep. So when they built the Academy originally on what we call Greg's Hill, they put it right there. And that's where it stayed until 1885, when one of the Pinkertons left enough money to build a big, huge, new Richardsonian-style building. And so, in a matter of, I'm figuring out probably 2 to 3 weeks, they moved that down to where it is now.
Maybe they lift it up and roll it down?
Oh, well, they would have cut the foundation off,
Right.
put skids underneath, and then either use oxen, and oxen were the most common, or they would have used horses. If they used oxen, they could just drag it. If they used horses,
They have to roll.
what they would do is have a few horses here, and then one of those windlass things that they use on ships to raise anchors, and the horse would just go around in a circle, and that would move the rope, and it would move ahead 10 or 15 feet. Then they'd take it out, put the caxton 15 feet further, and do the same thing. And so I suspect that's what they did, because it took 2 to 3 weeks. If they had done it with oxen, it would have been faster. They didn't, I'm surmising they didn't use oxen because once they started to pull that on skids, it might keep on going.
From the afternoon.
Because that's kind of a hill down that way.
Yeah.
So I think by using horses and a caxton, it might slow up. There's many buildings in Derry that have been moved. Probably most of you know the East Derry store. That was moved about a mile to where it is now. So many buildings were just moved that way because why not reuse a building? Many shops were turned into houses and moved like that. Oh, up by the, oh, back.
Oops.
And behind that was the stables and the country comfort. Now this was the trolley. This was the Chester and Derry. And it would cost you 10 cents to go from downtown Derry, Broadway, to Beaver Lake. Another 10 cents to go to Chester.
How did I manage about that dip?
All right, well, this is right in that dip.
Wow,
This is what we call Bell Hill in Chester. You have a Bell Hill on one side, and you have the main square in Chester. And in between, you have, what they did was built this long causeway, which went on for hundreds of feet.
I always wondered how that trestle looked.
Yep. That's the only picture I know of it. And the trestle only lasted less than 2 years.
Did it rot out?
Well, it was always needing repair, and people worried about when they were going over it, so they made it into a mound of dirt. And so it was a berm that went through. So, but we know, so that's a very limited time, 1896 to 1898, that this thing existed. And you can imagine a bunch of Pinkerton students going to Pinkerton or coming back from school, after school, coming here on the Chester and Derry trolley and getting to this spot and starting to rock the trolley. And I know that happened a lot. And that's probably another reason why they went to a mound rather than, because, yeah.
But quite often they boarded during the week.
Mm-hmm.
They would just come over on Monday and go back on Friday.
I have a wonderful description from the French family of Henry Flagg French, describing how you could stand on Chester Hill and look up towards Pinkerton and see a long line of Pinkerton students, this is before the trolley, all walking back home, each one carrying a sack of laundry over their back.
They'd been away for the week.
Yeah.
How many miles would that be?
Now this is my last photograph, is my mystery photograph. This was inside Edmund Angell's collection. Edmund Angell took photographs in Derry, Londonderry, Chester. That's it, all right? So I'm pretty sure that this must be one of those 3 towns, and probably 90% of his photographs were Derry. I have been racking my limited brain for several years now, trying to figure out where this is. If somebody can assure me they know and can prove it to me, I will give them an autographed copy of Nutfield Rambles. I can't for the life of me figure it out. In the background, you can see a church steeple. That kind of looks like the church steeple at in Auburn at Long Meadow. Right? It can't be Long Meadow. Auburn didn't look like that. And we can see another road coming in down here. Looks like there's a stream that goes underneath there. The road makes a kind of a S-shaped.
It was a main road because it got telegraph poles.
Yeah. I may go to my grave not knowing what this is.
Even in Chester, you have that road that curves like that.
Yeah.
It's a wide road.
I don't know. Again, I may never know what that photograph is. Dr. Angell left this as his legacy for us to try to figure out what it is. And
Will that be on your gravestone?
yeah, maybe. Maybe I'll get that engraved on my stone, yeah. And I'd love to know what it is.
Well, it's a dirt road, isn't it?
Dirt, well, every road was dirt back then.
Fairly wide, too.
Yeah? And kids look like kids.
Yeah.
Chester kids look pretty much like Derry kids. Maybe not quite as nice, but pretty much.
To me, it looks like the Chester Church steeple.
Well, you think it does. They're standing straight.
But it's certainly not the main road from Derry. If that's the Chester Church steeple, this is not the main road. It could be 121?
I don't know. What I should do is make a copy of it and keep it on my dashboard in my car.
It's not going to look like that anymore.
Was there a year?
Oh, we know it's most likely the 1890s. You know, give or take. But that's the best we can do. And probably it's good that we have some mystery still left in our lives. And perhaps to you this is not a grand mystery, but to me it is. I just showed the Heritage Commission a few weeks ago a photograph that I had been looking at for 20 years before I finally realized where it was. And it's right about 400 feet from my house. So I've been driving by that location for 50 years. And suddenly it dawned on me, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, there was a mill there, there is a mill there. Yeah, by gosh, the road does make that turn. And right at the corner of Beacon and Elm Street, Maple and Elm. And I was real proud of myself when I finally figured it out. And then I thought to myself how dumb I was all of these years for not finding it out. All right, so this is what Dr. Angell has given us today. A great man in his day, a man of respect. There was never a bad word ever said about Dr. Angell that I have ever found in all the press. Maybe his inventions never were marketable because situations beyond his control. They say a light that he used for automobiles. Well, the design wasn't used, but the name was Presto Light. And one automobile company, they say, still kind of uses that name. But that's about all. Very clever inventions. He really did want to help mankind by his acetylene lamps, by his odorless privy. We can mourn the loss of his son today. And by the way, that gravestone is in Ripley's, believe it or not. So, he's a man that was remembered. And now we've gone by 2 generations beyond that, and soon there will be nobody to remember Dr. Angell, except for the photographs he left. And maybe that's enough.
People don't make prints anymore, it's all automatic, on digital.
And I'm sure Karen can arrange for any copies of these to be made, if any of you really want one. That's Karen back there, who's the chairman of the Heritage Commission. So, well, that's all I have for you tonight. And the obligatory, are there any questions?
I mentioned to you earlier when I came in, and now that you've summed things up, I have a mystery.
Yes, sir.
And the mystery is, somewhere around that laboratory building
Mm-hmm.
is a cannon that was buried, and the water department of Derry tried to find where this metal cannon might be. And using their technique, they found that the whole area is covered with metal, and so I have no idea where that cannon is. That's my mystery.
Now, someplace on Thornton Street.
Probably,
Yeah. See, Dr. Angell was oftentimes a childlike man. Every 4th of July, he'd bring out that cannon and bring it around town so the kids could have a little bang on 4th of July. And there was one thing that he loved more than almost anything except for his family and mankind, and that was baseball. He was a fanatical baseball player, and he was still playing baseball probably well into his 70s. So, another little thing about Dr. Angell. Any other questions or anything else? All right.
You had a picture of the half stone
Right.
with Edmund Angell
Yeah.
and so forth. And then down at the lower right-hand corner is the saying, "I don't know how to die."
Right. Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, well,
Lizzie.
yeah, it's the fact that his wife was never sure about doing anything right. And this is only what Ralph told me, that she was assured that she would make mistakes. And so that was her last line.
Oh, that was her line.
Her last line.
Okay.
That was Lizzie's last line. I don't know how to die. Well, I don't know about Lizzie, because I don't really know many stories about her. But I know that with Dr. Angell, he certainly knew how to live.
Well, it's unusual just to have 2 children in those days.
Right, yeah. And I think Ralph was very spoiled after the death of his brother.
Dr. Angell didn't make his son go to school.
No, no. Ralph wanted to be a printer, and that's what he went. Where his father went to Bates and all these theological schools, he indulged his son, who was a very bright man, in doing what he wanted to be, and that was a printer. And in the Derry News in those days, everything was hand-set type. And that's what Ralph did.
You made an interesting point about Bates.
Mhm.
He would have paid my wife's tuition, all expenses, if she would only go to Bates.
Mm-hmm.
But I chose to go to the University of New Hampshire. Guess where she went?
She went. When the Benjamin Chase Company had closed down, and it was right before it was being converted into condominiums. I'm a person who likes to get into old places and see what I can salvage for the museum and so forth. And I went over to where Ralph's printing press was. And there, tucked away underneath something, was a note about needing more type that he had written to my father, and my father had never found it. It was just typed in there, just waiting for me, you know, after my father's death, after Ralph's death, to find this one little note saying that he was running out of this certain type of pica. Anything else?
Thank you very much.
Okay, Skip.
You mentioned he was in the Oddfellows Club.
Yeah.
Was he a member when it blew up? Do you know that?
I don't know if he was a member when it blew up. Probably. And probably like most men, he'd find some way to blame something else on, you know. It wasn't me. No. And my office hours are on the town website. So if any of you want to come down to the municipal center and just start looking at some of Edmund Angell's photographs on my computer. I'd love you to do it. There's nothing I love better than talking about old photographs.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Thanks, TJ.
My knowledge of technology could be summed up, in a couple lines. It's TJ that made me tonight.